Before we get started, let me introduce you to my dear old anti-alias. Sorry, just a little bit of Photoshop humor. When you make a selection in Adobe Photoshop, something happens. The computer uses your mouse movements, hand-eye coordination, to draw an area on the screen. If you're working with something like a rectangular marquee, like my Auntie is put into, you don't need anti-aliasing. Remember, Photoshop makes images up out of pixels. We're dragging something from the real world, the three-dimensional world, and we're putting it into a two-dimensional area, and the area we put it into is made up of little tiny squares, pixels. You can't make those smooth. So, if we have anti-aliasing as a process, if we leave it off, our edges on rounded shapes will appear ragged. We call it the jaggies. You may have heard that term. If we turn anti-aliasing on, we have that option, it creates a more visually smooth look. So how does Photoshop take a square pixel and make it smooth? Let's do this. Let's get out of here and go into Andy's amazing demo for anti-alias. We'll start with the rectangular marquee. I want you to notice something. There is no anti-aliasing for the rectangular marquee. It is grayed out. I'll come over here and draw a rectangle. Now, if you remember the shortcut for filling an area with the current foreground color, that's Alt Backspace on a Windows system, Option Delete on a Mac. If I deselect that and zoom in on it with that wonderful scrubby zoom, you will notice that no matter how big I make this, the edges will be perfect and they will be straight. The box is drawn at the same raster as the pixels. You don't need anti-aliasing. Let's double-click on the zoom tool, takes back. You'll notice if I go to, say, the elliptical marquee tool, anti-aliasing is on. Now let's start by turning it on and drawing an ellipse. Do something about like that. We'll fill that again with the color. Now I'm going to make another one, and I'm just going to turn off anti-aliasing for the second one. So it might be a little bit different in size, but the only difference between these two is that anti-aliasing is off here, and it's on over there. Let me fill that with the color. You should be able to notice already that this one looks jagged on the edges, where this one appears smooth. Now again, how does Photoshop smooth a square? And these pixels are squares. Let's zoom in again. It does it by creating what I call a coating on the edges. And the edge coatings are basically colors and transparency that are put in between the pixels. As you can see, there are none here. So when we reduce it in size to my eye, smoke and mirrors, to my eye, the shape looks smoother. Now here's a question I get, and it's a very valid one. If when I use anti-aliasing, it looks nice and smooth, and if I don't use it, it looks ragged, why would I not want to use it? There's actually a lot of reasons for that. We'll talk about more of those when we get into text, for example. There are times when you want to turn it on and or off. And there are times here when you just want exactly what you're selecting and nothing more. Because remember, anti-aliasing actually adds something. It adds a coating to make the pixels look smoother to the eye when it's viewed at 100%. That's anti-aliasing. Now, the elliptical marquee does have the ability to do anti-aliasing. As we mentioned, the marquee doesn't. All of the lassos have anti-aliasing. One of my favorite old tools, the magic wand, has anti-aliasing. The text tool has anti-aliasing. Some of the drawing tools do. Its primary purpose is to fool my eyes into seeing something smoother in a world made up of squares, the pixels.